in the Philippines, Mid-Autumn is what, a celebration of the moon, worshiping the moon. It's like a mooncake festival. So they cannot do that during that period. So we held it last Friday, October 6th. Yeah, during the Golden Week of China.
Dr. Romel, you're in New Era. I'm just across the street.
Yes, just
in
across the fact, I'm proposing to the New Era University to change its name to New Era University of the Philippines.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice, right? It was nice. In fact, the Board of Trustees like it. Oh my God, it's sexier. So from University of the Philippines, Diliman to New Era University of the Philippines. So nice, right?
We should catch up soon. You're just across the street.
Yes, yes. And we have the largest arena. You know, every graduation, we hold our graduation at Philippine Arena.
Yes, that's right.
May I give you advice that if Harry could not be with us at the beginning, we can put Romy at first because he has a good PPT.
Oh,
how do you say?
Definitely.
If Harry could not be with us at the beginning.
Okay, it's up to you. I always follow the team. I'm a team worker.
A team player. Let's do rugby together. Scramble.
Yes.
Yeah, it would be good. We actually, I'm not too sure whether you're aware that 2 days ago we had a similar kind of webinar, but also between scholars from China and the Philippines. But it was on a slightly separate topic, but related to the South China Sea, crisis management and confidence building. But today has got a more legal sort of and component to the conversation, mainly US, Philippines defense sort of agreement. Yeah, so
I follow that. Although I'm not a speaker, but I think the discussion is very good.
Andy, aren't you going to speak? You are one of the panelists, right?
No. I mean, I did not. I speak as the opening remark, but did not attend.
Okay. Yeah. You mean on the Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday discussion. We had a Tuesday discussion. So yeah, I thought it was good. It was helpful to have that open discussion. Do we have to wait for? We've got two other speakers to come through, right? Harry and I just saw Professor.
Mr. Zheng. Mr. Zheng. I think we can wait for a few minutes. He's trying to figure out the technical problem.
How the?
You have 2 minutes anyway.
Yeah. Romel, I'm just trying to play the ASEAN cheekiness, you know. Do you not envy us, Malaysia?
Okay. MDF, yeah.
Do you not envy us, Malaysia? At least we are not caught in this crosshair of this big power rivalry, right?
Oh, what's the MBS?
Well, what's the envy? I just felt the stress that you are in right now. You just say that you
okay. They are the pro-Western people. We call it the pro-Western people. Yeah.
You know, I just made a remark on Tuesday, you say we in Malaysia, we have 5 prime ministers in 5 years. And our foreign policy has by and large stayed the same, and you guys just change one president and he completely U-turn.
Yeah.
It was such a contrast.
In my previous work, I described our foreign relations. We have a foreign affairs, but no foreign policy.
Affairs and policies are different.
Yeah, foreign affairs, external relations, but we lack foreign policy. Yeah.
Meaning affairs are a lot more emotional rather than rational.
Oh, mixed. It's a mix. But right now, it depends on who is talking because, the decision of the president right now to align itself with the United States, it's based on rational reason. But rational reason is not necessarily based on national interest. you know, our policy is always captured by elite and most influential groups in the Philippines. The concept in political dynamics, our elite captured democracy.
Yeah.
So the elite capture of our foreign policy is so strong. And it's now the pro-Western elite shaping our foreign policy now.
Okay, Captain Tian, the hour has come. Should I go ahead and start? And then while we wait for Harry to join us later on?
Yeah, I think as I advise, I think we can put Romeo as the first.
At the beginning, yeah. And then the speakers will come through. Okay, let me just make some introductory remarks. Well, the hour has arrived. It's 8 p.m. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, my fellow panelists, for accepting our invitation. My name is Peter Chang. I'm the Deputy Director of the Institute of China Studies, University of Malaya. I'm also the Research Director of East-West Bridge, and today's event is hosted by East-West Bridge in conjunction with GGI, which Andy founded and leading. The title of today's conversation, let me just go through it again. Bear with me, is Philippines-US Cooperation Treaty and the South China Sea issue. The real purpose for this in most the events that East-West holds is really to provide an open space, a neutral platform, a common avenue whereby we would be able to have a fairly sort of free and candid discussion on issues that matters to us a lot, but yet we seem to have differences that we don't seem to be able to breach right now. So I really see that this is the moment and the kind of space in which we can be very, very, try to be as candid and as open as we can, express the reservations that we have, how we feel that our positions has been misunderstood by the others, and how we are having difficulty understanding the other side's position, so we can seek clarification and seek mutual understanding. So I think that is the spirit in which we want to enter into this conversation. It's nice to be in agreement all the time, sometime, but it's not very helpful if disagreement sort of sweep the differences beneath the carpet. So if you think that there are disagreements, but help us to understand where the problem is, where it is that we need to have a better understanding of your position, and then try to bridge that gap. So that's the spirit in which we want to come into the conversation. Okay, so we have got 6 panelists and we have only an hour and a half. On Tuesday, we have a similar, we almost ran out of time because all of you have got a lot of expertise and we really want to give you guys maximum time, but there are 6 of us. So for that reason, I'm going to cut the introductory remark very short and want to go straight into this conversation. I know that Romeo has got slides ready. So once Romeo, we try to finish this in about 10 minutes and then we'll get the rest of the speakers comes in and have a conversation about it. Romeo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Very good. So I'd like to start now. So I'd like to discuss the expansion of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement and examine this in the context of the South China Sea disputes and the trilateral relationship among Philippines, China, and US under the current administration of President Bongbong Marcos. So if you will look at the policy pronouncements of the Philippine government, the Department of National Defense is the one pushing for the expansion of EDCA with strong backing of the armed forces of the Philippines. And right now, the Defense Secretary eyes the development of EDCA in order to develop a stronger defense system for the Philippines. So that's the major objective of the Philippines of allowing EDCA to be expanded because it wants to strengthen our national defense system. And so what is the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement? So a brief history. As the name indicates, it aims to enhance Philippine-US defense cooperation, particularly in the aftermath of the 2012 Philippines-China standoff in the Scarborough Shoal. So that was the origin of EDCA. It was signed in 2014. Okay, and the agreement allows the construction of American military facilities inside Philippine bases. So these are all American military facilities inside Philippine military bases in order to implement the regular and even extended presence of American troops in the Philippines on rotational basis in order to cover various types of military activities, especially in the area of maritime domain awareness and maritime security, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, search and rescue operations, and counterterrorism cooperation. With the decline of terrorist threats in the Philippines, the US and the Philippines are now doing less and less counterterrorism cooperation, but more and more cooperation in the area of maritime domain awareness and maritime security and humanitarian assistance and disaster response. EDCA is considered to be an important supplemental measure to the Visiting Force Agreement signed in February 1998. And you know that the BFA was a response of the Philippine government against China's occupation of Mischief Reef in 1995. So what's the difference between the BFA and EDCA? The BFA pertains to American troops visiting the Philippines. So it's all about regulations about American troops visiting the Philippines. But every time they visit the Philippines in order to conduct various types of military activities, they need to bring in a lot of logistics, a lot of equipment, a lot of tools for exercises and other types of military activities. And the main purpose of Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement is allowing American forces to build facilities inside Philippine bases in order to support the activities of American forces under the Visiting Forces Agreement. The BFA entered into force in 1999, okay? And the main purpose of the BFA is to implement the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951 by strengthening the interoperability of military forces through joint exercises and other military activities. So what are these other military activities? These other military activities are now defined by the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. And this is my own graphics of how it evolved through the years. So it started from 1947 during the military basis agreement. The United States built their own military bases in the Philippines, but we rejected that in 1991. Okay, part of the 1947 after the 1947 military base agreement, we also signed the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. And if you will look at these two agreements, they were called Cold War treaties. Okay, and in the Philippines, we describe this as an unequal treaties because these treaties were imposed to the Philippines right after the end of the Second World War. So I consider the 1947 Military Bases Agreement as post-colonial treaty after World War II, while the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty is a Cold War treaty that aimed to support American military activities not only in the Philippines but also in the wider Asia-Pacific region. But we rejected the basis extension in 1991. Supposedly, the military basis agreement would last 100 years, but we shortened it to 25 years, and that is why it expired in 1991. However, when China passed the 1992 Law in Territorial Sea and Contiguous Zone and eventually occupied Mischief Reef in 1995 and fortified it in 1997, the Philippine government decided to sign the Visiting Force Agreement in 1998. Okay, but you know the history after during the election of President Duterte, he suspended the implementation of the Visiting Force Agreement, and he even suspended the implementation of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, okay, in 2014. Now, the main purpose of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, the expanded EDCA, is to extend the original 2014 EDCA to another 10 years because it will expire next year. You know, the original 2014 EDCA will expire next year, and the main purpose of the expanded EDCA is to extend the implementation of EDCA, okay, not only in its original locations, but in new additional locations. And these are the new additional locations. In the previous slides that I presented, these are all available openly in the US State Department website, where you can see here the contribution of the United States to build all these military facilities. You know, there's lots of money. Okay, and in my analysis of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, I think this is the Philippines' shortcut way to build its military facilities in Philippine bases, because EDCA has this agreement that after the expiration of this agreement, all these military facilities will be turned over to the Philippine government, especially the construction of runway and ports. It will be now owned by the Philippine government. So these are the locations of the new EDCA. And if you will look at the existence of all these EDCA locations, you know, additional locations are in fact situated in an area where there is a strong China interest, you know, in the northern part, you know, facing Taiwan, and in the western part facing the West Philippine Sea. So that is why China is reacting to the expanded EDCA. Okay, they are reacting to that because of the intent of the perception that EDCA has something to do with U.S. military preparation in case of Taiwan contingency. But President Bongbong Marcos stressed that China need not to worry about EDCA if there's no attacks versus the Philippines. And I always tell in public that the China has no intention to attack the Philippines, so there's no need for EDCA. Here we have this Cagayan Governor Manuel Mamba. I met him 2 months ago in Cagayan, in Tugigaraw, and he's really opposed to the establishment of EDCA in his province. And now, because of his opposition to EDCA, Governor Mamba is now facing a lot of legal suits against him. Okay, so our public is divided on the issue of EDCA right now. Some are against EDCA, some are pro EDCA. Okay, but if you will look at my analysis of the EDCA, I published this in my regular column in Eurasia Review, where I describe EDCA expansion as damaging to Philippines-China relations, and I will not elaborate. And I also describe in my occasional piece in Philippine Star that EDCA expansion can even damage Philippine security interest. So, and I also describe in my occasional column at Manila Standard of the many security risks associated with EDCA under the Marcos Jr. administration. So apparently, I have already articulated my view against the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. And if you will look at the EDCA sites, they are in fact located in an area that are considered to be major flashpoints of armed conflicts in Asia, particularly in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the Korean Peninsula. And this is already being articulated in our Philippine Development Plan, covering the period 2023-2028, where we consider all these major flashpoints as essential to Philippine developments, and therefore we need to address these major flashpoints. And what are these major flashpoints? The Taiwan Strait, Korean Peninsula, South China Sea. There are also flashpoints of conflict in Kashmir and Kuril Island, but we pay more attention to the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. And if you will look at all these major flashpoints, US and China are always involved, but I'm more interested to talk about the flashpoint of conflicts in the West Philippine Sea. And you know this already because you are all expert, our concept of the West Philippine Sea. But I would like to present to you this map of the West Philippine Sea, because the West Philippine Sea is not about the South China Sea. The West Philippine Sea is composed of three major bodies of water. Waters around the Luzon Sea, waters around the Baho de Masinloc, and waters around the Calayan Island Group. Now, the Philippines and the United States are planning to conduct joint patrols in the West Philippine Sea. And for me, in my analysis, this patrol will be done largely not in the waters around Baho de Masinloc or waters around Calayan Island Group, but mostly waters around the Luzon Sea. And these waters around the Luzon Sea are waters very close to Taiwan. So that's my analysis. So, okay. So I will skip this, but the reason why I'm presenting this slide is to show you that out of the 54 land features that we declare part of our territory within the Calayan Island Group, the Philippine government only occupies 9. Okay. And others been occupied by other parties like Vietnam 21, Taiwan, of course, Malaysia have 5. But we still have unoccupied features. And the main purpose of Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement is to improve the capacity of the armed forces of the Philippines to patrol our waters so that we can guard other unoccupied features within the Calayan Island Group. Okay. Especially features around the reed bank, because the Philippine government is really serious in developing the reed bank for natural gas and oil. Okay. So Marcos' recent visit to the US led to the strengthening of Philippine-American military alliance. But this is my analysis. If you will compare Philippine-US economic relations, it remains to be low compared with China. And China remains to be the Philippines' biggest partner and one of the biggest drivers of the country's economic growth amidst ongoing disputes in the Philippines, in the West Philippine Sea. And if you will look at our relationship with the United States and China, we are very strong in the area of military relations with the United States, but very weak in the area of economic relations. But when it comes to China, we are strong in economic relations, but weak in military relationship. And that is why we are focusing our attention on developing and enhancing our military relationship with the United States, because of the intention of the Philippine government to strengthen our military capability to defend our national position in the West Philippine Sea. And these are the graphics indicating that China is really leading in terms of economic relationship compared with the United States. Okay, and China's in the. This is now my remorse because of the decision of President Bongbong Marcos to align itself with the United States. Many of the proposed projects in the Philippines under the Belt and Road initiatives are now being put on hold. Okay, especially those major infrastructure projects. So the Philippines is failing to unleash its highest potential in developing robust economic relationship with China because of the West Philippine Sea issue. Despite the pronouncement of both parties that the West Philippine Sea shall not affect the dynamics of their overall relationship, but the reality indicates that the West Philippine Sea dispute, territorial disputes, and maritime jurisdictional conflicts in the West Philippine Sea disrupts not only economic relationship between the Philippines and China, but also economic, but also cultural and even political relationships. And all these major projects are now put on hold. But now we have this complete project, but this is just a small project, the Binondo Intramuros Bridge, okay, and the Israelia Pantaleon Bridge. But despite that, we continue to still export, tropical fruits to China. And I hope China will not retaliate, will continue to receive our tropical fruits, because if they refuse again to accept our tropical fruits, then that will really lead to the rapid deterioration of Philippines-China relationship. And right now, we propose a strict balancing of relationship between the United States and China. But for me, balancing is difficult. Why? Because we are balancing different things. If you want to really balance the relationship, the Philippines should strengthen military relationship with China, okay, and strengthen economic relationship with the United States, because they have different weights. The weight of the United States is in the security aspect, but the weight of China is in the economic aspect. So there's really no balance. The real balancing is if the Philippines will be able to strengthen military relationship with China and strengthen economic relationship with the United States. And that's the thing, that is the situation where the Philippines can really effectively balance our relationship with China and the United States. And that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Romel. I've always enjoyed your presentation because your slides, as the other panelists has already mentioned, is always so rich. So many work has gone into it. It's so sad that we only have 10 minutes for you. You deserve half an hour, but because we are so packed with other experts on the panel, so we have to restrict the time that you have. Right now, for the following panelists, we could just limit ourselves to between 8 minutes or so that really we have time for conversation afterwards between you guys together. Now, I would like to invite Yan to do share your commentaries with us. Yan?
Oh, Harry is here. Hi, Attorney Harry.
Harry, I'm sorry. I just want to acknowledge Harry here with us. And I also want to make another point. Romel, your organization, PPVPT, I think, is also a co-sponsor of our activities. Thank you so much, Romel, for being
Thank
part
you
of
very much, Peter.
this effort. Thank you so much. Okay,
can I go ahead and make a short intervention, because I have to go to another Zoom meeting and then I'll come back. Okay, so can I go ahead?
Okay, go ahead, Harry.
Intervention
Yeah,
now?
go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, my intervention tonight will be as a lawyer, as well as a policymaker, having served once in Congress. No, but as a lawyer, I represented my relative, who was Senate President then, when the Philippine Senate decided to put an end to the US-Philippine Bases Agreement. No? And this is the late Senate President, Jovito Salonga. Now, I start my presentation by saying that there is already a constitutional principle, as ratified by the people when they ratified the 1987 Constitution, which frowns upon the existence and presence of not only foreign military bases in the Philippines, but also the presence of foreign military troops in the Philippines. This is a new provision in the 1987 Constitution, and it now expressly states that unlike ordinary treaties, which must be concurred in by 2/3 vote of the Senate, treaties that allow the existence of military bases as well as foreign troops in the country may even be submitted to the people for their ratification if the Senate does so decide. Now, the policy, therefore, of the Philippine Constitution is to frown upon the existence of foreign military bases and troops in the Philippines, borne by our painful colonial experience. No? Let's face it, and this is actually a historical fact. The Americans purchased the Philippines from Spain, not only because it is consisting of 7,000 islands with its natural resources and its market, but because of its strategic position. From the very time that the Philippines was purchased by the Americans from Spain, they had always intended an American presence where the Philippines is because it is a jumping point to mainland Asia, specifically to China. No less than President Trump in his last visit in the Philippines, emphasized that one of their best real estate purchase was in fact the Philippines, because the Philippines serves as a gateway to Asia. And that is why, inevitably, you cannot divorce the talk about US military presence in the Philippines from the historical motivation in the first place that led the Americans to purchase the Philippines from Spain. They want a foothold in Asia. They want a foothold, particularly as far as China is concerned, and let's not make any mistakes out of it. Now, as counsel for my grand uncle, who said no to the continued presence of the US Philippine bases in the Philippines, we filed 2 cases questioning the constitutionality, number 1, of the Visiting Forces Agreement, as well as what Professor Banloy just discussed, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Now, the first treaty was more legalistic. It was in violation of the Constitution because, contrary to the specific provision of the 1987 Constitution, which of course was a later enactment compared to the earlier mutual defense treaties of the 1950s, foreign bases can only be in the Philippines pursuant to a treaty duly recognized by the other contracting party as such. Now, the Visiting Forces Agreement was concurred in by the Philippine Senate, but it was not concurred in by the US Senate. And that was basically the point being made. Now, this is, of course, not a puerile discussion, because a treaty that is recognized as such by a contracting party has the effect of law. It therefore constitutes a national policy. But an agreement that does not have the concurrence of the lawmaking body of the United States does not have the force and effect of law. It may have the effect of an executive agreement, but it cannot formulate a national policy. So the first attack against the Visiting Forces Agreement was simply that it did not comply with the literal provision of the 1987 Constitution, which required that it be recognized as a treaty by the other contracting party as such, and therefore should have complied with the constitutional requirement of concurrence by the US Senate. Now, we lost that case. And we lost that case because the Supreme Court erroneously said, we don't care how the Americans treat the Visiting Forces Agreement. We take it at face value when then US Ambassador Hubbard said that they recognize the VFA as a binding international agreement. But you see, under American constitutional law, there's of course a big difference between an executive agreement and a treaty. An executive agreement needs a law for it to have legal effect, whereas a treaty will have legal effect on its own. Now, on a second opportunity to question the VFA, the Supreme Court then adopted a different tact in defending the constitutionality of the VFA. And they said this time that there is in fact a treaty anchor to the VFA, and that is the Mutual Defense Treaty of the 1950s. Now, obviously, this is erroneous. Why? Because the 1952 Mutual Defense Treaty predated the 1987 Constitution. How could you now say that a treaty basis, in order to implement a 1987 constitutional provision, could be provided by a 1952 treaty? Simply could not be done. But you can see here that the judicial branch of government was in full deference, of course, to the executive, because under the Philippine Constitution, the president or the president of the republic, in fact, is the sole architect of foreign policy, and therefore the court respected that position of the president as chief architect of foreign policy. Now, when we question EDCA, we in fact compared the verbal provisions of the US-Philippine military agreement with the provision of EDCA. And lo and behold, we proved that 85% of the language of EDCA is similar, if not exactly the same, as the language of the Philippine US military bases agreement. How did they differ? Well, unlike the bases agreement, the US then was duty-bound to pay rent. Under the EDCA, they got our military bases for free without payment of rent. That was the substantial distinction between the two. But this time, the Supreme Court, again reiterating its previous decision on EDCA, on the VFA, said that there is a treaty basis, and that treaty basis, again, is a mutual defense treaty. I will never concede that the Philippine Supreme Court decision is correct, if only because of the timeline. If it is only in 1987 that we required that the mere presence of military bases and troops in the Philippines should be through a treaty duly recognized by the other contracting party as such, that provision of the Constitution already contemplated the existence of the Mutual Defense Treaty and established that the existence of that treaty would not be sufficient to comply with the present-day constitutional requirement. Why do I focus on the legal arguments against EDCA and the VFA? It is to assure our Chinese friends that as far as the Filipino people are concerned, they have taken a stand against the presence of foreign military bases and troops in the Philippines. The Philippine executive may get away with it for the time being, but the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and eventually there will be a Supreme Court that will uphold the supremacy of the Philippine Constitution in this regard. We now know, of course, that we continue to have ongoing disputes. Let us not insist that either China or Philippines is correct in their claims over the disputed islands. The truth of the matter is the issue of who has better title to the disputed islands remains unresolved. Of course, China denies the validity of the arbitral award, but as a professor of international law, regardless of China's protestations, the reality is at least that decision now clarified matters and will enable a peaceful resolution of the dispute. Why? Number one, the tribunal said that none of the disputed islands can generate 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone, which means that all of the islands can only generate up to 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. That would mean not one claimant can claim vast amount of maritime jurisdiction, which we describe as exclusive economic zone, and therefore facilitating possibly peaceful resolution of the controversy. Now, secondly, whether or not China will accept the ruling, the reality is it has underscored at least that for purposes of UNCLOS, as a restatement of customary law, all maritime zones must be pursuant to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, the reality is, while the dispute continues to be unresolved, there is a need to continue to attempt at least to come up with a peaceful resolution to the controversy. But you see, this is where law and policy now intersect. It is not to the interests of a waning hegemon power to actually give up its role as the leading economy and the leading military power in the world. It is not to the interests of an ex-hegemon state to concede that the world has ceased to be bipolar, it has ceased to be unipolar, and it has become multipolar. It will take time, perhaps, for the Americans to accept this fact, but it is already happening, as exemplified by the rise of BRICS, which unfortunately the Philippines is not a part of, but which I believe we should become a member of the organization. But it is in this context now that we need to understand and appreciate why the US presence in the Philippines now is as such in connection with the disputed territories in the South China Sea. The reality is the Americans have been consistent that they do not care about conflicting claims to territory. that they are hands-off as far as this ongoing territorial dispute is concerned, and that their only concern is freedom of the high seas and freedom of navigation. But where it is convenient, of course, they will support the Philippine claim. They will, in fact, exacerbate tensions, because that is the only way that they can remain material and relevant in the context of Philippine foreign affairs. I will stop there and look forward to a discussion with our colleagues later.
Thank you, Harry. Harry, are you going to leave us now and are you going to join us later, or
I will
what's your plan?
I will go in and out. Unfortunately, I'm in Rome right now, and I do not understand why I went to Rome, because the whole afternoon I've been appearing before arbitral tribunals, before webinars, in press conferences. The whole
Okay, I hope you do.
So it was useless to leave the Philippines.
I hope we will have a chance to field some questions for you so that you can take us
Yes,
through
I will
some of the
definitely. It will
very,
just
very
take me a
complex
while.
legal explanation you've given.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's listen to Yen Yen. Yen Yen, you want to come back on this? You could address those issues that both Romel and Harry has just raised, or you just want to give your own commentaries for now. Go ahead, Yen Yen.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I would like to really grateful and thankful for the organizers for inviting me to this very important conference. I think during this tough time for both of us, I really wanted to have a candid and very direct negotiation, not communication with my Manila friends. Well, actually, I do have many questions in mind. I think that I'm really thankful for the previous two Manila friends for introducing and enhancing my understanding of this EDCA and VFA and this American Philippine ally. I think this is very helpful for us, for me especially, to understand this ally thing. I do have, because there are so many things going on in the South China Sea, so I'm thinking that maybe I can candidly and frankly pose my questions first to my Manila friends, and then see maybe we can continue our discussion later. Well, first of all, I should really follow Mr. Harry Roque's comment on the U.S. I think that well, it's really my personal question that because we all see that the U.S. Philippine ally has been enhancing during this Marcos government. I'm thinking that whether the decision-making people in Manila really think that the United States will come to the rescue of the Philippines when there's anything happening in the Second Thomas Shore or Scarborough Shore, because I do aware that the U.S. has already said that the MDT 1951 MDT covers the Coast Guard of the Philippines, but I do not see any like more detailed commitment by the United States saying that it will, go for the Philippines and go will bear the risk and have the conflict with to China when something happened in the sea. So I'm not sure whether the decision-making people in the Philippines believes that the United States will definitely come to help. Well, I also asked this question to my my American friends, because like 2 days ago, I had a dialogue with our American counterparts. I posed the same question to them, and none of them give me a very clear answer. So I really wanted to hear from my Philippine friends. And second, I do see that this several years, in the recent years, I think the Philippine and the United States is trying to bring more people in to establish this mini multilateral mechanisms to maybe have more supports from the outside, like these U.S., Philippines, Japan, and U.S., Philippines, Australia, and also the Philippines is now trying to reach a VFA with Japan. I'm not sure whether it has been achieved yet. So I'm thinking, what is your thinking and purpose of that, or any achievements yet? And third thing, I think the current tension also rise from many fake informations, and also especially from the social media, which has really greatly hyping up the tension, I think, which is not a very good thing. Like, just give you one example of this Philippines Coast Guard cutting off this floating barrier supposedly placed by the Chinese Coast Guard. Well, from the Chinese side, we have already said it's already been clear that it's just a fake news, because this rope and net barrier that the Philippine Coast Guard has cut off is not the thing that the Chinese Coast Guard post. So it's not a totally true story at all. But I see that not many people realize the fact that this kind of things really is rising up the tension. I think it's really not necessary. And my final question is, actually, I really wanted to look forward and echo back to my friend Romel's comment on the China-Philippine relations as a whole. I do aware that the Foreign Affairs Secretary Manalo say that the South China Sea issue is not the only factor in the country's relationship with China, but I think it's playing a more and more important role, and I think it affects many factors. Other factors in the bilateral relations, such as the BRI project, has been postponed, as already been mentioned by my friend. So looking forward, I think the most important thing and dangerous thing is that we don't have a normal dialogue platform to communicate. Like the BCM, we have already had like 6 meetings, before in the past 3-4 years, but so far it has been stopped. So I'm just curious that and also I think the Philippine Coast Guard also said that the hotline, they refuse to use the hotline with the Chinese Coast Guards as well. So I'm just thinking, maybe in the future, is there any normal direct platform of dialogue, of communication between the two governments? Because I think the way that we have to find out to go out of this is actually, we need to sit down and talk, but seems that there's no platform for that. So these are all my questions and my thinking of how we can move on and to get out of this thing in the South China Sea. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Yan. Thank you. Because of time, but I do want Romel and Harry to answer, but I'm not going to ask you guys to answer all the 5. Romel, could you answer? You pick 2 of the questions that Yan has raised, and then Harry, you pick 2, and then I leave 1 for Ira to answer. Romel, go ahead. You want to answer 2 of Yan's questions. She has got 5 altogether.
Well, technically, I think I believe with the statement of Attorney Harry Roque that the commitment of the United States to defend us is at the policy level, but of course it has to go through the constitutional process in the United States. So it will all depend on the decision of the U.S. Congress whether the United States will act militarily. But in my observation, it's very difficult to rely on the United States. Why? Because of 2 occasions. The Mischief Reef incident in 1995 and the Scarborough Shoal of 2012. We asked for help from the United States, but the United States said we cannot intervene in territorial disputes. So the answer of the United States, instead of defending us, is giving us the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement in a visiting force agreement in 1998, and then after the Scarborough Shoal standoff, the EDCA in 2014. But whether U.S. will really defend us, I'm not very sure about that, because based on my conversation with some lawmakers in the United States, when I visited Washington, D.C. before the pandemic, I heard this comment from some lawmakers in the United States that they will not allow American military forces to defend the Philippines just because of small rocks in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Romel. Thank you. Harry, you want to have a go?
Yes.
Answering
Well, of
some
course,
questions.
I completely agree with...
Make it very succinct so that we got more time for others.
I completely agree with Romel, but what I'm going to say now is I'm going to describe who's actually in charge of Philippine foreign policy right now. It's not the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. The Secretary of Foreign Affairs is a career official, and as career officials do, they're used to taking orders from head office. So when they become head office, they really don't have policies to formulate, no, because they're used to just taking orders. The real Secretary of Foreign Affairs right now is the cousin of the president, who is the Philippine ambassador to Washington, D.C. Now, the background of the president's cousin is that he's a public relations officer, practitioner, and he is a long-time PR consultant of the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. So foreign policy right now of the Marcos administration is dictated by U.S. authorities. And that's one thing that the Chinese should understand. No, it is not Filipinos making policies for Filipinos. It's Americans dictating through their factotums. No, and of course, the fact that Ambassador Romualdez has been a PR practitioner for the U.S. Embassy is, of course, duly recognized by almost everyone. No, so that's point number one. Point number two, of course, is the politicians are appealing, of course, to the colonial mentality of the Filipinos, and they're therefore appealing to a domestic audience when they make promises that the Americans will come to our rescue. My dire prediction is conflict will not really arise because of the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea issue. Conflict might happen because of the Taiwan Strait issue. And of course, EDCA would still be relevant because Americans would be using the military bases that we have, which are proximate to Taiwan. And of course, we will suffer as a people because under international law, if you allow yourself in a manner, if you allow your territory to be used in a manner injurious to others, then of course you incur international responsibility. We cannot feign neutrality, therefore, in case of a shooting war between America and China over Taiwan, although like Rommel, I completely agree that I do not see a shooting war over rocks and fish in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pass the time next to Ira. But Ira, before you answer your prepared comments, would you like to answer two of the other questions that Yen Yen posed? That is the problem of disinformation, social media that maybe fan some of the nationalistic public sentiments, and then also the lack of platform in which we could really address this kind of issues right now. Ira, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Perhaps very, very quickly, let me just reiterate or resound with my colleagues, Dr. Banlawi and Attorney Roque, when they do not believe that the US will come to our rescue. The only instance I can think of in Philippine history of an American coming to our rescue was after that same American had left in the form of General Douglas MacArthur, who, when he left, said, "I shall return." Then he came back when we were already post-invasion. And I think the closest that we would see from this current time is when, from the statements of Vice President Kamala Harris to President Marcos Jr., when she said, quote, "An armed attack on the Philippines armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments, and that is an unwavering commitment that we have to the Philippines," unquote. Now, very quickly, I do not think we have Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea, precisely because we do not have those facilities, precisely because the islands are now their airports and airfields. But that's just the fact of it. You know, history has taught us that from our relations with the United States, through all those years of their presence in our bases and them actually paying rent, while in this case with EDCA, they would not. Our most advanced naval vessel is still a repurposed, decommissioned U.S. Coast Guard destroyer. So when we're talking about that friendship, you have to consider what exactly is that other friend giving us. Now, to answer very quickly the second question of Dr. Yanyan, I absolutely agree. There's far too much disinformation. There is far too much real information as well that is being hyped excessively by media, by social media on both sides. From a few months ago with reports of a Chinese Coast Guard using laser technology to blind the Philippine Coast Guard or the Philippine fishermen in the area, to a video that was going viral just a few days ago with a single fisherman on a speedboat trying to enter territories only to be filmed stopped by the Chinese Coast Guard. But I think what is more important here, whether it's the removal of those nets, the problem of disinformation, the problem of biased information, is why is that information even out there? Why are we letting it have such wide berth? Whenever I'm dealing with issues like this, I try to recall this proverb: a friend nearby is better than a relative far away, or in Chinese, yuan qin bu ru jin lin. I just have to ask that when we handle situations like this, that the Chinese Coast Guard, the Chinese Navy, act as a friend nearby. Before all of these situations happen, before Scarborough Shoal and Kalayaan Group of Islands and all that, Chinese fishermen and Filipino fishermen would fish in the same areas, and at the end of the day, some would come up to the other countries' boats, share a few drinks, laugh, and tell stories. That is the problem when we're looking at when a single Coast Guard ship chasing away poor defenseless fishermen, that will stay on Philippine social media and Philippine news for weeks to come. And if there is really a sincere intention upon the Chinese officials to be friends to the Philippines, number one trading partner, 300,000 Filipinos in mainland China alone, that we're supposed to be that friend nearby, then learn from what the US did not do to us. They were not that good a friend before, and they had decades to do it. We have to realize this. EDCA, they say, is jointly, the identification of the sites is jointly with the US and the Philippine military. Okay. But then you really can tell in the maps shared by Dr. Banlawi, all 9 or so sites are in response to any potential Chinese aggression, not just towards the South China Sea, but towards the Taiwan Strait, the Korean Peninsula. We're an archipelagic country, 7,000 so islands. There are no EDCA sites to the east facing the Pacific Ocean. Makes you wonder why. I'll cut it there because I know we're pressed for time. Thank you, Dr. Zhang.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you so much. Now I just want to invite Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen, to present your sort of prepared remarks and comments just to add on to the conversation that we had. Dr. Chen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. Also, I would like to thank the organizer to include me in this important and very interesting discussion. The first question, I think, previous panelist also mentioned about the willingness of American intervention in the Sino-Philippine potential conflict. But I would like to bring my understanding on that issue. Of course, I fully agree with Dr. Romeo said, the possibility of the willingness of America direct intervention within the conflict is very the potential. The possibility is very low, but it is clear United States want to put China on the fire. It seems to me United States tried to do its best effort to demonize China, and also let China to take some kind of reputation damage. But it seems to me United States is not ready for the face-off military conflict with China. We can see it whenever happened in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or United States so-called the Strait crisis. It seems to me United States fears the consequence might harm itself. So in that regard, I totally agree with the previous speaker, but I would like to add a little. We need to understand the pattern of the China's behavior. It seems to me we don't understand very well, especially for our Filipino friends. After those years, especially after 2012 Scarborough Show's standoff, it seems to me the Filipino friends still don't understand the way of thinking, the pattern of Chinese behavior. If we take a look, actually there was a very classic Chinese way of reaction to this kind of dispute. We call in Chinese, we call you li. The action taken by China should be or can be justified. You li. That means the action taken by China could promote China's advantage, promote China's interest in. And the third one is called 有节. That the action taken by China should be according to the principle of proportionality. So if we carefully study these three principles, we can understand what action, what the next step China will take. At first, I think China can tolerate those kind of provocation happened in recently months by Philippine side. China may tolerance, but afterwards, China may take a big step reaction, because when sort of psychological accumulation in the Chinese people, it will encourage the policy decision maker will take a strong reaction to Filipino action. So that's what I would like to share with our Filipino friends. We need to understand, fully understand China's way of behavior, China's logic. The third one I would like to mention is about that some technical issue in the regarding the constitutionality of the EDCA and also visiting force agreement. Actually, as my question is maybe it seems to me that Harry is already off, but anyway, I bring it to further discussion. From my understanding, if EDCA is executive agreement, but it is executive agreement for the mutual defense treaty or executive agreement for the visiting force agreement, or both. That was the first one. If, for example, like visiting force agreement be declared unconstitutional, whether the EDCA still invalid or still valid or automatically be invalid. I remember President Duterte during his tenure, he want to suspend the visiting force agreement and also threatened to withdraw the visiting force agreement if EDCA is executive or implementing agreement for the visiting force. If visiting force agreement be suspended, where EDCA automatically be suspended. For example, from my understanding, visiting force agreement is be regarding as a treaty by the Philippine government. It requires two-thirds majority of senators to approve. But from American understanding, visiting force agreement is still administrative agreement, executive agreement is not a treaty. So both sides, American and Filipino, have a different view regarding the nature of the visiting force agreement. So if President of the Filipinos suspended the visiting force agreement,
We lost him.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Chen, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
郑老师，我们现在听不到你。Technical problem, I think.
Now we lost him.
Okay. Okay, while waiting for him to get back, can I pose this question to both, maybe to Ira? Dr. Chen was asking whether if there's a suspension of the visiting force, would that also means that suspension of ECA as well?
Okay. Well, at this point, let's look at what the Constitution says for the Philippines. And under the 1987 Constitution, Section 25, Article 18, states, after the expiration in 1991 between the Republic of the Philippines and the United States of America concerning military bases, foreign military bases, troops, or facilities shall not be allowed in the Philippines except under a treaty duly concurred in by the Senate and, when Congress so requires, ratified by a majority of the votes cast by the people in a national referendum. The reason why the VFA is crucial to EDCA is because EDCA is deemed the implementing agreement or the implementing executive agreement to the Visiting Forces Agreement. The Visiting Forces Agreement, of course, in the 90s, was a treaty ratified by the Senate. It was its constitutionality was brought to the Supreme Court twice, and in both instances, it won. We don't necessarily have to agree with it, but that's the way it is right now. Now, there is point to what Dr. Zhang is saying, because if it is an implementing executive agreement, then it's rooted from the treaty which gives it life. And if, as what President Duterte did before, if you suspend that treaty, then there is that possibility that EDCA would not work. Dr. Chen.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you. I just want to bring Dr. Chen back. Dr.
Yes.
Chen, just now we lost you with a few minutes, but while we're trying to get you back, we already begin to discuss the question that you posed, whether the sort of cancellation of the visiting forces agreement will necessarily lead to the cancellation of ECA. And Ira was giving us a very quite in-depth explanation of it. But anyway, would you like to continue to finish off your presentation, because there are some questions that have arisen from your presentation. Dr. Cheng, the floor is yours. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. Sorry for the technical problem. The fourth one I would like to raise is about what kind of impact, for example, like because the new site designated by the new government, by the Filipino government, especially what kind of impact for the neutrality of ASEAN. And also for the centrality of ASEAN, because we bring the external regional power to intervene the South China Sea dispute. It would, from my understanding, it would to some extent will harm the centrality of ASEAN, and also will harm the direct negotiation with to resolve the dispute with China and the other coastal states. So seems to me that makes the situation more complicated and more difficult to resolve among us, because with their external regional power to intervene in this kind of situation, it will, for example, it will be delay the negotiation of code of conduct, and also will harm the regional arrangement for the for the South China Sea issue, for example, like scientific cooperation and environmental protection, because when United States, Japan, and Australia and other external region report it, because South China Sea issue is already very complex. When we bring more effect, more player into this kind of circumstance, so I don't know whether it will harm the centrality of ASEAN. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Back
you
to
so
you,
much, Dr.
Dr.
Cheng.
Chang.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cheng. Actually, I'm not too sure whether Romeo is here with us. I think Romeo would be. Romeo, would you like to take that question, Dr. Cheng's last question about what is this implication on neutrality, both to Philippines and also ASEAN centrality, if they, in the event of a conflict across the Taiwan Straits and the Philippines bases get drawn into the conflict?
Well, Philippine alliance with the United States is really problematic in the context of ASEAN's concept of zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. The Philippines is not neutral. We are aligned with the United States. So it's really problematic. That is why I always say in my pieces that allowing more and more American military presence in the Philippines is in fact erasing the neutrality of the Philippines. It's very difficult to be really neutral. And so it's really problematic. It's problematic. That's why we oppose it. I am with Attorney Harry Roque. He was already here. That yeah, I'm one of those people criticizing American military presence in the Philippines, because it's very difficult for the Philippines to become really neutral, independent, as long as we remain to be reliant on the United States. You know, I remember that during the time of the previous government, Attorney Harry Roque was the spokesperson of the president during that time, and I was consulted at the Department of National Defense about the revision of the Mutual Defense Treaty, and I would like to share with you the option of the U.S. government. But let me share with you the option first of the Philippine government. When it comes to the Mutual Defense Treaty, we have three options: either to abrogate the Mutual Defense Treaty, amend the Mutual Defense Treaty, or revise some provisions of the Mutual Defense Treaty. But you know, the stand of the United States, no room for abrogation, but they are willing to amend or expand it for the better, but no room for abrogation. See, so you'll see there that the United States really wants to keep us, And for me, as long as we have the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, even though we scrap the visiting force agreement, I think the Philippine government can still implement EDCA, because the visiting force agreement pertains to American troops, American presence, American personnel, you know, conducting military activities in the Philippines, while EDCA is about facilities. See? So it will be difficult for these facilities to be used by our American troops without the BFA, because the BFA facilitates the entry and movements of American troops conducting military activities in the Philippines in the form of exercises and other forms of military activities. But since Attorney Harry Roque is here, I think he is the best legal person to talk about the BFA, MDT, and the EDCA.
Well, actually, thank
Harry,
you. Well, thank you, Professor.
yeah, it's good to have you back here.
Yes.
Go ahead,
I'm
Harry.
sorry, I was just gone for 15 minutes for another webinar. No, but anyway, I'm back here now to stay. Now, let me say the differences. No, the MDT is a collective security treaty, a bilateral collective security treaty, whereby the Philippines and the United States will come to each other's rescue when they are under attack. The problem, of course, with this being a 1951 agreement is that even the definition of an attack has been clarified already in the case of Nicaragua versus the United States, which means that there must actually be the sending of regular armed forces into the territory of another state, if not regular armed forces, then of the same scale and scope as if conducted by regular armed forces. That is now the accepted definition of an armed attack, which only occurred in the 80s with the decision of the ICJ in the case of Nicaragua versus United States. So clearly, that definition of an attack under the MDT must now be construed as meaning the armed attack defined by the ICJ in the case of US versus Nicaragua. And therefore, the MDT will, in order to be triggered, must have as a precondition an actual sending of regular armed forces into the territory of the Republic of the Philippines or the territory of the United States, if not regular armed forces of the same scale and scope. So it talks about scope, and of course, it talks about the fact that it must be carried over a period of time. There must, in other words, be an armed conflict governed by IHL. So two things, no? The attack itself and the fact that there must be an armed conflict. Now, because of the definition of the ICJ, the MDT has, for all intents and purposes, become inutile. Why? Well, under American law, if there's going to be an armed attack and a contemplated war, there must first be a declaration of war on the part of the US Congress. So the MDT is not self-executory. It will require an act of Congress to begin with. And secondly, now, the type of attacks that could happen, the type that we see in the South China Sea, are not the kind of attacks contemplated in Nicaragua versus the United States. So they will never be sufficient to trigger the applicability of the Mutual Defense Treaty to begin with. Now, my basic contention too is that rebus sic stantibus. There's been a fundamental change in circumstances already, which makes, again, the MDT doubly inutile. And this change in circumstance, of course, is we're no longer dealing with a bipolar world. The MDT was signed and entered into when the world was supposedly divided between the good and the evil. But the world is no longer divided between the good and the evil. It is divided by those who want to be counted upon and recognized as equally important participants in world affairs, the BRICS in particular. So it is out of tune with the existing times. Now, the problem when we question VFA is when you read the provision of VFA, it really is all about military exercises. It only gives the United States and the Philippines a reciprocal obligation to participate in joint military exercises. It was never intended to be a legal basis for U.S. military intervention in the Philippines. In fact, there was a case. There was two missionaries kidnapped by the terrorist group Abu Sayyaf. American troops were sent to rescue them. And a former president of the Lawyers Association questioned that because, of course, it was contrary to the Constitution. It was contrary to the VFA, which says that U.S. presence under the VFA was only for military joint exercises. And the Philippine Supreme Court agreed, except that, according to the court, the issue of whether or not the U.S. military was in fact engaged in a military rescue was an issue of fact which the Supreme Court could not address. But in principle, the Philippine Supreme Court said, yes, of course, if the U.S. troops were in the Philippines for any other purpose other than conducting military exercises, that would not be sanctioned by the VFA. Now, EDCA is a completely different matter because EDCA is the byproduct of a shift in policy as far as U.S. defense establishment is concerned. They realized it was cheaper just to have EDCAs all over the world rather than maintain permanent bases, because permanent bases means you have to spend to maintain them. No? And that is why we have EDCAs not just in the Philippines, but also in other parts of the world. But again, as I mentioned earlier, when we compare the specific provisions of EDCA with the former Philippine-US basis agreement, 85% identical language, except they no longer have to pay rent. So the basic actually is EDCA. VFA is for military exercises. Mutual defense treaties for collective security, which I think has become inutile because of the definition of an armed attack.
Thank you so much, Harry, for differentiating and clarifying all the different categories. We really need to give Andy some time right now. Andy is listed at the last, and we are running towards the last quarter of an hour and a half. So I want to pass the floor now to Andy. Andy, and then once Andy finishes, then hopefully we have time for a bit more free-flowing, quick Q&A. Andy, the floor is yours. Andy, you got to mute yourself. Unmute. We can't hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Let me first, I have to say that I really enjoy your moderation in that you not only summarize very well the highlights of each speakers, but also manage to promote interactive discussion. That's so great. I appreciate that a lot. And following your spirit of interactive discussion, and also because I'd like to also echo some points by the previous speaker, so I maybe speak a little bit longer than the time you allowed. I will mainly address the use of force. Use of force part of the international law as may be applied to China-Philippines engagements in either peacetime operations or a hypothetical wartime situation. First point I would like to say that is on the peacetime operations. I think there are mainly two categories of use of force, I mean, by nature. First category is the use of force in law enforcement actions, which covered most of the scenarios of the use of force between Chinese Coast Guard as the law enforcement agencies and the Philippine Coast Guard or Navy, maybe navies. A second category is the use of force in international relations, which provokes the application of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter on prohibition of the use of force in international relations. So the rules of international are quite different for those two categories of use of force. For the first category, the rules of international require the use of lethal force. I mean, the lethal force should be as a last resort and not beyond necessity. For the second category, we all know that they only admit two exceptional cases, self-defense and UN security authorization. But the situation is complicated when it comes to the China-Philippines situation in the South China Sea, because the potential invoking of US-Philippine defense cooperation arrangement documents, including the sulfur, the mutual defense treaties, EDCA, and its guidelines. The question is, if the US military come to assist the Philippines in the frontline law enforcement engagements, will the nature of the use of force between two coast guards be escalated into that of use of force in international relations? For that, I need to hear from our Philippine colleagues. Second, on invoking the US-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, generally speaking, as also mentioned by Harry, a mutual defense treaty applies to a situation of self-defense of the signatory. If the Philippine side takes, provocative actions in frontline operations, could it still invoke mutual defense treaty for military support? This also applies to the application of mutual defense treaty between the US and its other allies, like Japan. The most important issue on the MDT is that the definition of an armed attack on Philippine vessels, as have been mentioned several times by Harry, which accordingly, the MDT could be triggered and vice versa. But what happens if it is not the situation that the Philippines is under armed attack, but that the Philippines takes provocative actions? So to what extent exactly will the engagement between the Philippines and China trigger the mutual defense treaty in the South China Sea? And how exactly will the US fulfill its security commitment under mutual defense treaty? And does US commitment under MDT means that the US must go to war? For those questions, we have just talked a lot. I think those are very important questions. Third, on the neutrality obligations of the third party in a hypothetical China-US confrontations. I think this point is also mentioned by Harry, other speakers. These points relate to the military bases offered by the Philippines to the United States. In the hypothetical case of an armed conflict between China and the United States, in either cross-strait relations or in the South China Sea, will the Philippines allow the US to use those bases to attack? If the Philippines does allow the US to use Philippine bases to attack China, in such a case, I mean, either in Taiwan or in South China Sea, Philippines will be clearly violating this international obligation and the international neutral law. I think this is also mentioned by Harry. In that case, the whole Philippine territory could be turned into a legal battlefield. I think this situation also applies to the US-Japan defense cooperation in terms of use of force. Military bases in Japan also have the same scenario. For these points, I think I would also like to listen to comments from our colleagues. And finally, this is important, finally on the moral integrity of the United States and the West tolerance to, in my words, American exceptionalism. I think, in my opinion, the minimal level of moral integrity demands that one apply the same rules to the others as to oneself. So what we see today are totally double standards and obvious hypocrisy. Take the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and Israeli-Palestine conflict, for example. It is not that there is no invasion or no war crimes, but that the US can only allow the condemnation against the use of force on its non-allies. So as for the same attacks on civilians, the Hamas must be condemned, but not Israel. The Russian must be condemned, but not the Ukraine. So what's more important is that the same invasions and the war crimes have been committed by the United States once again without any accountability. And I think many Western countries just turn a blind eye to that. We have seen this in former Yugoslavia, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and are still seeing this. I must emphasize, this is not making an two-cookie arguments, but we, the people in Asia Pacific, we, the people in Africa, in Latin America, we need an explanation and answer to this. So that's the problem. So is the bombing of foreign embassies and bridges in former Yugoslavia a war crime? Is it torture and the cruel treatment of POWs in Iraq also war crimes? No, they are not, just because they are committed by the United States, UK, and Australia. So for all the above, I think we could conclude that whether the use of force is lawful or not is not that important, and who uses the force is more important. This also applies to the cross-strait relation, the Taiwan issue, many previous speakers mentioned. The simple question is, does the US have a legal basis to intervene militarily in such a situation? So I often had dialogue with the US counterparts. When I had dialogue with them, I think as for the legal basis for US military intervention in the Taiwan issue, 80% of them would cite protecting democracy. 15% of them would cite Taiwan Relations Act as their domestic law. 5% of them would frankly admitting that strategically, geopolitically, and military, the US would not afford to lose Taiwan. So given the international law as reflected in the UN Charter, only the two scenarios of legitimate use of force, as I mentioned just now, the self-defense and the authorization by the Security Council, none of the excuse falls into those legal bases. Just imagine when your country is taking back one separating province, the US showed up to intervene military, citing those reasons. Does the US have legal basis in international law to use force in this scenario? If that is true, any country could freely use force by claiming to protect democracy, or simply by saying, by enacting a domestic law. So for my concluding remarks, I would say that both China and the Philippines should pursue, as echoed by Harry, a peaceful approach to settle the American disputes. To impose one's claim in the South China Sea by using force forceful or provocative action is dangerous and may lead to irretrievable consequences. The US could fight and leave an offshore war strategy, which means the US will not fight a war in its own continent, has always been their approach. However, China and the Philippines share the unchangeable identity of being maritime neighbors. Peace and stability serve the best interests of both peoples. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Andy. You got lots of questions, and we'll need another an hour just to answer your questions. Those are very, very important questions. But I will give Ira a chance to have a go at question number 2. Ira, can you do it quickly? And then because we only have about 5 minutes left, I just want to give the rest of the speakers one line, 2 or 2 lines, closing remarks before we close up, okay? We're just coming up to time. Ira, go ahead and try to answer Andy's question number 2.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. With regards to the second question by Captain Tian, a similar question was posed in the April 19, 2023 Senate hearing on foreign relations, chaired by no other than the sister of the president, Senator Amy Marcos. She asked members of the Secretary of National Defense and the Secretary of the Foreign Affairs and their staff, what happens with the Mutual Defense Treaty? What happens with EDCA if, let's say, the Philippines attacks Vietnam and Vietnam attacks the Philippines in retaliation? What will the US do? None of them could answer that. Now, the second question I think of now is, given how many mutual defense treaties the United States has entered into bilaterally with all the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, it's clear that their only target is really China. Because what happens? Let's say Japan attacks the Philippines and both of us are treaty partners of the United States. What happens if Thailand, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, and all of us are treaty partners, mutual defense treaty partners with the United States, and their sites are in the Philippines? So I guess it's really a matter of saying it's mutual defense against one people's republic. And that's what the United States wants. So I'll just cut it short there, Dr. Chang. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now for closing remarks, I want to start off with Yan Yan, and then afterwards I want to go to Romel and Harry. Yan Yan, go ahead. Any closing remarks after this 1 hour and a half conversation?
Actually, I do have another question, but I have no time to ask. It's about another legal case, whether the Philippines will file another legal case on coral reef destruction and environmental protection to China. But I really wanted to hear a very simple answers to the 2 lawyers, especially Mr. Harry. But I have no time, I know. Final words, I think that there's something positive really happening recently. I'm not sure whether you have heard it, like the Chinese Navy saved 2 Filipino fishermen's lives 2 weeks ago. You have know about it? Because I didn't see much news from the social media and everything, because what I heard is that it's 2 Philippine fishermen, they were hurt and bleeding by their own by their own fishing boat's propeller, and then they come to ask the rescue from the Chinese naval warship, and then they treated them well in this warship and returned them back to the Philippine government. So this is only happening like 2 weeks ago, but I'm not sure whether the Philippine media has reported this story. I think it's a good thing that we should really let the people of our 2 countries know, and I really look forward to resume our future dialogue and really try to resolve the problem that we already have, and maybe especially to see how we can reduce the very much impact from the United States. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cheng. Thank you, Yan Yan. Dr. Cheng, are you still there? Do you have any final thoughts, Dr. Cheng? If not, then I want to pose this to Romel and Harry. Could you help us in terms of the closing remarks? What can China do to help to de-escalate, to lower the tensions? What should China be considering? What are the steps that they should be able to do to help to mitigate the difficult situations that we are in right now?
Okay, first, as a conclusion, I strongly believe that China will not attack any of Philippine vessels, Coast Guard ships, aircraft. China does not have that kind of intention. So second, China maybe can help de-escalate the tension if they will prevent their Coast Guard to go closer to our resupply mission in the Ayungin Shoal. Just stay there, don't make this dangerous maneuver or do this water cannoning or laser pointing. In fact, that has been my position for, I think the two parties should agree, they united on all unilateral actions that area. And second, to implement also the mandate of UNCLOS of prior notification if they decide to conduct their own respective unilateral actions. And number three is to implement the mandate of UNCLOS, that is for the parties in conflict to pursue cooperation in pragmatic nature. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Romeo. Dr. Cheng, let me come to Dr. Cheng first. I want to close up with Harry. Dr. Cheng, do you have any sort of final thoughts after an hour and a half of discussion?
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. I would just like one last point. What I would like to mention is, it seems to me the judgment rendered by Supreme Court of Philippines regarding to the EDCA case is too politicized. There's relative lower legal argument, too much geopolitical argument. It is very dangerous for a judicial body. The argument presented is so politicized. So where is the check and balance in a democratic country like Philippines? I do hope the judicial body can play a reasonable and a balanced role in the EDCA case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen Zheng. Now, Harry, you got to answer both Dr. Yan's question, if I may. Dr. Yan has a question, and also could you answer Dr. Cheng's questions as well, Harry, by way of closing up the conversation today. Harry, go ahead.
Well, let me first answer the question of our lady colleague. I don't see any utility in filing a new case. All that we needed to clarify have already been clarified in the first proceeding, particularly on entitlement to historical claims, as well as, of course, whether or not any of the islands can generate an EEZ, which is the most controversial issue, because if they could, then a single claimant state can lay a claim to vast areas of jurisdiction, at least, by way of EEZ. Of course, I agree with also the observation of Dr. Chen that the court should not have abdicated its function to uphold the supremacy of the Constitution, despite the fact that the president is chief architect of foreign policy. Foreign policy must still be conducted within the purview of the Constitution, and the Constitution already states a policy against the existence and presence of U.S. military bases, foreign military bases, and foreign troops in the Philippines. What can China do to reduce tension in the area? Well, in the Philippines, we have a saying, makipag-away ka na sa kamag-anak, wag lang sa kapitbahay. Go pick up a fight with your relatives, but never with your neighbors. That, I think, should be a principle that the Philippines and China should adhere to. We will always have conflicts, but we have existed for thousands of centuries at a time when the Caucasians were still living in caves, and we had no problems that we could not solve.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you. It's such a wonderful quote and setting to end this conversation. I don't think we resolved everything, but I think we certainly have brought a lot of light to some of the issues that are so complex. And hopefully this discussion will continue, and we will continue to build sort of common understanding. I really learned a great deal from all of you. I really hope that you have also learned from each other as much as I have. So I thank you again, and thanks again to Andy and also to Romeo for joining us in this East-West conversation. And we look forward to having more conversations in the near future. Thank you all. Thank you, Harry. Thank you,
Bye.
Ira. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you, Yan Yan.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
Romeo.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang.
Okay,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good
Good night.
night.
Bye-bye.
大家。
Good night. 大家好。
Nice. Your
可以吧？
moderation
你
is
今
so
晚 OK，可以了，可以了，还可以了，多好。